Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show, Colorado Business News. Today we have three members of the Colorado General Assembly. We're going to be talking about the 2016 session and what it portends, and some issues related to the business community and how the business community may be affected by them. My first guest from the Colorado State Senate, Nancy Todd. Senator, thank you for joining me.
You're very welcome. I'm delighted to be here with you.
Well, it's always good to have you on the show. And from the other side of the Capitol, we have two guests. Sue Ryden, State Representative. Thank you for being here, Sue.
Thanks for having me.
And Susan Lontine, also from the House. Thank you for being here, Susan.
Thanks for the invitation, Aaron. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, you're welcome. And having three Democratic legislators, all women, that should make it for, I think, a very interesting show. You're smiling, Susan, I see. And of course, we have your Republican counterparts will be on in another show. But let's start off, Nancy, looking at the 2016 session. You are now in the minority, of course, in the state Senate. 18-17 is the ratio of Republican versus Democratic senators. What are your expectations for the session? What would you like to see, and what do you think will actually happen?
Well, first of all, I want to say minority by one makes for a need to really work together, and I think that we saw that on the flip side when we were up by one, that we had to really work together, which I think is really important and good to do. So I'm really looking at education, of course, always at the top of the list. Looking at higher education, making sure that we open up more opportunities for students to be able to go to post-secondary opportunity or post-secondary experiences. Early childhood, I think, is going to be an issue that we will hopefully be able to address. And when we talk about that from the business side, recognizing that the earlier we educate children, the less we have to make up for down the road. Speaking of road, moving right into transportation is going to be another issue that we're going to be addressing. How do we pay for the roads? How do we pay for the repairs? And how do we make sure that the public is engaged in some of those decisions? So I think those are going to be two of the main issues that are coming forward this year.
All right, I want to talk about all those a little more in depth, but Sue, first I wanted to give you a chance to give us your sense of what 2016 is going to look like.
What we've heard so far is that the budget will be very, very tight, tighter than it was this past year. It's sort of a conundrum in the sense that we have a growing economy, a thriving economy. We have record revenues coming in, but we also have this thing called Tabor. And so we are hitting the cap on Tabor, and there will be refunds. And so some of the things like education that we had to cut during the recession will not be restored fully before we have to do the refund. So that's a very big issue. We're hoping that we can come up with some solutions to that, and that will definitely be a bipartisan effort.
Is there a way to, I guess you'd have to have a constitutional amendment to amend Tabor so that when there are good years, those funds could be applied to those kinds of deficits, or they could be put in a rainy day fund. Do you think we're going to have that kind of proposal? And if not, why not?
Tabor was passed before we had the single subject law, and it was not grandfathered in, and it has multiple subjects in the amendment. So it's a matter of attacking one piece at a time, and figuring out which piece that would be and how we would do that has been a real difficult issue. I think we have tried some things. Last year we worked on an idea to move what we call the provider fee into a separate enterprise fund, and that would have opened up some more room before we would hit the cap. And so we may see that coming back again this next year.
Because that did not pass.
Correct.
Okay, and in that case, that idea, just outline that concept real quickly.
About 5 years ago, we passed a bill at the request of the hospitals to have them give us a provider fee that they would collect, and we would use that to match our Medicaid with. And that fund has grown over time and is over $600 million now. And if we were, the mistake that we made then was to put that in the general fund, and because of Tabor, that's the fund that is affected by the cap. So the effort last year was to take that money out of the general fund, put it in a separate enterprise fund, which is legal under Tabor, and then we would have had that extra money to put into education and transportation. So we're hoping that something can be worked out this next year, that we would be able to do something like that, which would be at least a help toward the right direction.
So Susan, the taxpayer Bill of Rights aside, what do you want to focus on?
Well, Sue kind of took the words out of my mouth that I wanted to talk about, because I agree the budget is going to be a big issue for us next year, and I think it's going to be difficult for us to look people in the face and say, hey, we're giving money back, but we don't have money for schools and to fix your roads. That's, to me, wow. It's a difficult thing for people to wrap their heads around. Why are you doing that? And some people don't really understand the implications of Tabor. A lot of people don't. I think it's an election year, so we're going to see a lot of statements, probably from both parties, but definitely we'll be making some statements and staking out our positions on what our core values are. And for me, that I agree with Senator Todd that we need to work on our early childhood education, because the payoffs in the long run really add up and help with issues like remediation, keep our kids on track to graduate on time and be ready, college ready, career ready, whatever their direction is. And we could do that much easier in the beginning than later on in their education career.
Well, let's talk about Tabor for a minute. One of the provisions of Tabor is that the elected officials have and certainly the General Assembly has the opportunity at any time to present to voters a change, an increase in tax or whatever. And for example, the gasoline tax, which in this state has stayed at, relative to other states, a very low number. We have, I think it's estimated by some of the studies, something like a $10 billion backlog in just repairing, the need to repair roads and bridges to restore them to a rating of good, not ideal, not best, but simply good. Why not make the case to voters that, hey, here are the conditions that exist, this is what we need to do to fix them, and we want you to, especially now that gasoline is under $2.50 a gallon instead of $4 a gallon, we want you to add 10 or 15 cents to a gallon, which I would think 10 or 15 cents would solve this problem. Nancy, I'm going to let you tackle that first.
Well, I think, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that, many of our surrounding states that are very Republican have all voted to increase the gas tax. The question is, who wants to bring it up? Particularly in an election year, if you're up for re-election, then you can just imagine what the opposition will say about you. And so I think part of that is a willingness to step forward and say, this has to happen. Way back when we did referendum C and D, C passed, D did not. And my personal feeling was, well, then there has to be a natural consequence. You chose not to raise taxes, so we've started talking tolling, and people get all upset about tolling. Roads have to be paid for. The infrastructure of our nation, not just our state, but of our nation, is really at stake. And so whether we bring that up in the legislature or whether it becomes an initiative, but apparently the polling shows that there's no appetite for raising the gasoline tax. Part of it is people just don't understand that there's not this little pocket of money to pay for roads and bridge repair in the state budget. And so helping recognize that and helping educate the public is extremely important. But I'm quite sure that there will be some discussion, particularly from some of our term-limited legislators that are able to kind of step out and say, let's go for it. Let's talk about this. And whether that can be bipartisan is always up for discussion.
Well, clearly, it probably would not be successful unless it were bipartisan. But the polling numbers, I know the polling numbers have consistently said Coloradans are not enthusiastic about raising the gasoline tax. But on the other hand, I mean, you look at, that's what campaigns are for. I mean, you look at the campaign of someone like a Federico Pena or a John Hickenlooper that started at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% and then end up winning a plurality or a majority of the votes. I mean, so I would think that the need is so significant, and all of us are experienced with the quality of many of our roads, especially our rural roads in the state, that I would think if the case is made, I think Coloradans, when a specific case is made, when you go to Coloradans and say, this is what we need, this is exactly what we'll use the money for, I think Coloradans tend to respond to that. But obviously I'm in the minority on that. Sue, what did you want to say on this?
Excuse me, I guess that a good example is Aurora, where I represent, and we have tried to pass bond measures over the last 5 years or so a couple of times for transportation projects, and we were very specific about which projects, and this was a city election. But it's so much easier for people to say no than yes, and in my previous life in public relations and working on some ballot measures, it was very clear that it's much easier to get people to say no than to get them to say yes. And so a matter of funding the measure and figuring out how to convince people and getting the message out, those are all part of it. But it's a really tough thing to do, and we've seen through experience that our voters are not really interested in raising taxes, and we're the only state in the union where the legislature cannot do that. So I guess some legislators are happy about that because we never have to worry about being accused of raising taxes, although we get accused of it anyway. But it's something that is just a really difficult situation, and maybe until the average person really feels the pain of the traffic jams and the tolling, maybe we can have a change of heart.
All right. Well, on that semi-optimistic note, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. For information about the program, who our upcoming guests and topics are, and ways you can participate, please go to our website. That's harbertv.com. And most of all, thanks for watching.
Welcome back to the show. We're talking with our 3 legislators from the state capitol, Nancy Todd, Sue Ryden, and Susan Lontine. So if you could change something at the Capitol, I'm going to start with you, Susan. If you could change something at the Capitol to make the legislative process better, more effective, higher quality, what would you change at the state capitol?
Well, right now we don't have any full-time staff as individual legislators. We have part-time aides who help us out during session that are paid, I think, $11 an hour. And their hours are limited. I don't think they're even allowed to do 40 hours a week. And that's during the height of the session. It would be a huge help if I had someone, and I think the other legislators here might agree, that we had someone who was full-time, paid a decent salary, who could devote more time to constituent outreach, which would be the biggest thing, and policy development work would be a huge help to me.
So I mean, that can't be that expensive to do. Why don't we do that? I mean, doesn't the General Assembly have control of its own budget?
We do. I don't know that there's, we have a tight budget. Our state government is so lean. I'm amazed at what we get done for the amount of money we have. And there's been no appetite to talk about this. I would like to see it, but it would cost money, and then it would be added to our budget, yearly budget. And so there's no appetite to spend any extra money than we have to down there, which I think is a shame, because I think we need to talk about this.
Well, what's your sense, Sue? I mean, Nancy, you and Sue are both you're veteran legislators, if I may say. Why is I would think both sides of the aisle would want this. Am I wrong?
I think you're right about both sides wanting it, but whether they're willing to talk about it and make that decision, because we must balance the budget every year. And if you add several $1 million to legislative activities, then you're taking it away from something like education or higher ed or health care.
So let's talk about the business community. There are roughly something like 500,000 businesses in the state of Colorado, especially if you include the sole proprietorships. What can the state do that would help businesses, Nancy? What are some ideas?
I think probably the most important thing is to provide a strong workforce and an educated workforce. So looking at opportunities for growing the capability and the sustainability of people who are trained and skilled, and having that connection with business and education. What are the jobs that are needed? How do you train them? And how do you make sure that you have people ready to go to work? And I think that communication, instead of it being an education versus business, let's figure out ways to make that happen. And I think we're starting to see that more and more in conversations with both spectrums, higher ed as well as early childhood and then the K-12 system. There is an investment. There is a commitment to saying STEM, for example, that in the next few years we are going to be seeing a number of engineers that are retiring. We need to replace them. We need to make sure that we are growing people into that capability. Lockheed Martin, for example, and the fact that Colorado is one of the #1 states in the nation for aerospace. We need to be helping our students be prepared for what those jobs look like. And there's a wide spectrum, whether it's a 2-year, a 4-year, but it doesn't start just when a student's in high school. It starts at early childhood. You start early on setting those goals as a state, saying, how are we growing? How are we preparing our students for the future? And I think that partnership is where we will see the success.
Sue, what are your thoughts? And the business community in the state historically has seemed to always been very supportive of educational initiatives. Is that a fair statement?
I would say that's true, and we have done a lot of bipartisan work on workforce development issues and a lot of shifting a little bit from the idea that everyone should go to a 4-year university to showing the opportunities to our young people for work in the trades, for example, which requires very significant skills and training, but it may be in a different direction than the academic direction. So I think we've done a lot of good work along those lines in the last couple of years.
Susan, what else do you think we can do?
Well, we need to work on our transportation. The education pieces, I think, have been covered beautifully by Senator Todd and Representative Ryden, but we also need to work on our transportation issues. And I have had some business people tell me that they personally have an appetite for doing what you suggested in raising the gas tax. I don't know that they would have an appetite to raise it as high as you suggested, but they recognize the need that they need good roads, and our state needs good roads to help our businesses continue to grow and transport needs across the state. One thing on education, I also know that our rural districts are really struggling just to keep teachers there because they can't afford the salaries that the larger districts like Denver, Douglas County, Jeffco, and even in the northern part, Wyoming pays their teachers much better. So they're having a hard time holding on to good teachers in our rural districts.
Okay, well, we're going to take another break, and when we come back, let's talk about the regulatory burden on businesses and what we can do to maybe alleviate that. So we'll take a break, and we'll be right back.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of the Aaron Harber Show. We depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's and world's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to allow us to work for you. To find out more or to make a donation, please go to
Welcome back to the show. I'm with our three members of the Colorado General Assembly talking about now the business world. So if you know, when you look at the regulation of businesses, I think most business people I know feel they are over-regulated. I haven't had anyone say we want more regulation. Well, actually, that's not always true. So what can we do, or is there anything we can do to make it easier for businesses to operate in Colorado? Susan, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I'm serving my first term. So last year I was campaigning for the seat that I now hold, and I met with some folks in the business community, and they gave me that, you know, that we feel like we're overburdened with regulation, that we continue to pile regulation and then not do anything about past regulation to update or modernize. And in some cases I believe that is true, but I told them, you know, if you can think of something, you know, make a top 10 list and come back to me. I'm still waiting to hear from those folks with what they think is so burdensome that we need to remove it. I do believe that we need to be as streamlined and as thoughtful as possible with businesses, but right now Denver's economy, I don't think the whole state is enjoying the success that Denver is, but Denver's economy is one of the biggest, fastest growing in the nation, and you know, our economy is doing really well. So please let me know what we can do to help that, but until I can hear from you exactly what it is you think needs to be done on that area, I don't know what to tell you. All
right, I'm sure though. I'm sure you will get some suggestions.
They'll probably call me after they see this.
But that's good. That'd be a good thing. Sue, how about you? What are your thoughts?
Well, as a small business owner myself, certainly some of the paperwork issues are a little burdensome. And one thing that comes to mind is the vendor fee that retail companies get to keep part of when they fill out the paperwork and pay the sales tax to the state that they have collected from their customers. In my opinion, the small businesses are not reimbursed at all at the rate they should be. It's something like 0.6% or something of the sales tax. I would like to see that balanced out, where the smaller businesses receive a much higher fee for doing that work, and perhaps some of the giant corporations that are, you know, getting millions of dollars back in vendor fees would just lose a little bit. And I think that would even the playing field a little bit. Another area is procurement. And I've been working since I got to the legislature 7 years ago to try to make sure that we have an even playing field for our small businesses when they're trying to do business with the government. So we were successful in getting our procurement technical assistance centers renewed and continuing on, and they give a lot of assistance to companies to get government contracts. But we also need to look at our procurement system in general and whether it's really being fair to all of our businesses.
Is there any effort, is there any concerted effort to take a look at existing laws and say, oh, you know, here are some that really don't make sense anymore or that are antiquated that we could actually get rid of as opposed to simply passing new ones? Has the General Assembly undertaken anything like that?
Well, if you recall, when Governor Hickenlooper was first elected, that was one of the first things he did, and I think they came up with 400 or 500 sort of antiquated, out-of-date, duplicative laws that we have since gotten rid of. A lot of it is in the rulemaking and not necessarily in the lawmaking. So he has really been diligent in having all the agencies really try to streamline their operations and become a lot more efficient.
Well, of course, and the governor having a business background is probably a lot more sensitive, you know, to that need. Well, that's a good start. My guess is we could still do more. But Nancy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think one of the things that I look at and I continue to hear is that Denver and Colorado is rated as one of the top business-friendly states. And so when I hear that and I see that, then my question is, what are the biggest issues? For the small businesses, I think that finding good quality workers is the one thing that I hear. People saying, you know, I'm looking for someone that is, number one, drug-free, that they're dependable, that they have those soft skills, that they are communicable, and make sure that they have good social skills with meeting the public, that some of the training and being able to hire dependable people, because I think being a business owner and it all falling on that owner and their family oftentimes to be the quality workers gets tiresome, and it becomes burdensome. So I think, again, making sure that we are setting those standards high enough that when business is looking for workers, that they feel trusted, that they feel like they are really able to find people that they can leave their business in their hands and not be there 24/7. And so I think that's a really important piece.
One of the fascinating aspects, and you've all talked about education, is the Colorado workforce is one of the highestly educated workforces in the country. But a big part of that is because people with degrees and advanced degrees come into the state. It's not because we're turning out the highest number of PhDs or master's degrees or whatever the case may be. So let's talk a little bit about higher education. It seems like it's a perennial discussion about the need for better funding for higher ed, but higher education doesn't seem to have caught on in terms of the attention of the public. Sue, why do you think that is, and what can we do to help higher education, or do we need to help higher education?
This is another issue that Tabor has influenced greatly. We basically have spun off our public universities as enterprises so that they would not be under the Tabor cap. And as a result of that, we are also not allowed to provide more than 10% of their funding. We're not doing that at this point, but we would not be able to go over that even if we wanted to. So higher ed in the budget is not protected. And so when we need more money for something that has more requirements around it, like K-12 education, then it may come from higher ed. Personally, I think that we just really need to invest every penny that we can in our higher ed system. It's something that, again, relates back to the business community. Companies want to move to states that have really good public universities. Ours are great, and we want to keep them that way. It's a real problem, though.
So what any ideas from any of the three of you on how to better fund higher education, how to fund higher education in a more stable and consistent manner? I'm open to ideas. Nancy, it looks like you're...
Sure. I think one of the things that we have seen historically is that the presidents and the CEOs of our higher ed institutions are great fundraisers, and they do a lot of grant writing. They do a lot of working with alums and really making sure that they've established foundations. Is that a way to run a business? Probably not the most ideal. I think we're also seeing some variety in delivery. I think of CSU Global, for example. It's an online institution, and it's a part of the CSU system, but it gives a variety of keeping costs down, but providing good education. So I think many of our schools are starting to look at different alternatives and different ways of delivering rather than just the brick and mortar being on the campus, but being in internships, being in overseas, being in foreign lands to really have that experience and bring that to the forefront. So I think that what we're seeing is that higher ed institutions are saying we've got to do things to make it work, and so offering some alternatives. So in terms of do we just give more money, I don't think that that's necessarily the answer. I think it is a matter of supporting and making sure that we still have quality higher education in Colorado. We're losing some of our good, strong students to other states because our tuition keeps going up. And so as a result of that, we need to make sure that we are giving that variety of experience to students right here in the state of Colorado.
Okay. All right, I want to thank my guests for joining me today. I know we're out of time, but stay tuned for part 2 of our 2-part series with our Democratic legislators. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.